enjoyed to the car wash late last night, trying to get them washed off. And then, so we thankfully all had showers last night, because when we woke up this morning, there was no water. It was like just a pencil, and then it came down to nothing. And I had my face all soaked up, and I was like trying to, you need water. And then we've not had internet, so it's been a little crazy this week. And of course, the issues that we have far pale in comparison to the things that have been going on in North Carolina and in parts of Northeast Tennessee, and so much devastation, and the stories of sometimes survival, and then sometimes too of people watching, their family members being washed away in these floods. It's terrible, the things that I've read about. And I would encourage you all, if you know anybody, or if you're finding ways to provide supplies or do what we can to help those people, because I feel like we each have had a time in our lives where we have been in need, and we can remember who brought something, who called, and to do that as a witness, and to do that for God, to say that I'm doing this because, this is what I've been called to do. This is how I'm, witnessing. That is very meaningful, and that just sticks with people. So I would encourage you all to do what we can do to provide for those people. We have a friend who is a traveling nurse, and so she was gathering up some things, and I've been looking for some opportunities for the church to to give or to offer for some things, but if you all know of anybody, then just bring those people to our attention and what they may need, and we'll try and gather some supplies. I think that's real important. So there's just been a lot going on, and because of that, last week we didn't have power to the church, and so they, or maybe there was power but not in this area, had canceled service. So I had planned to be able to do the fall feast and try to do them in timing, so we could do them ahead of time and talk about Rosh Hashanah, which was this past week, but that's not how things ended up. So I really want to spend and take a little bit more time describing these and not feel so rushed to try and get each one of them out before they come. So what I want to talk about is a holiday most of us probably didn't recognize, or maybe we saw it written on our calendars and kind of brushed over it. But it's a Jewish holiday. Rosh Hashanah is celebrated modern day times as the Jewish New Year. But what we're going to look back and see are the biblical foundations of this holiday and how we can recognize it. And I don't want to say celebrate it, because it's like in modern day times it's taken on, it's kind of like Christmas. Like we celebrate Christmas as the birth of Jesus, but culturally Christmas is something whole other else. So, but we're going to look at the biblical foundations and find out how to recognize and appreciate this holiday for what it ultimately means for us. So, Rosh Hashanah is celebrated as the Jewish New Year. That's not a name that we see in the Bible. So if we were to look in our concordance, this Rosh Hashanah is not going to come up. In the Bible, it is listed as the Feast of Trumpets, or in Hebrew, Yom Teruah. This is the beginning of the fall holy days. There are both spring holy days and fall holy days that in the Bible that God had commanded for Moses to celebrate particular feasts. So there are spring feasts and there are fall feasts. And Yom Teruah, or Rosh Hashanah, is the beginning of the fall feast celebrations. And so I've listed here, there's 4 spring feasts and there are 3 fall feasts. The spring feasts correlate with Jesus's birth, death, resurrection, and the coming of the Holy Spirit. And those are really interesting to go through each one of those and see how Jesus fulfilled those. The fall feasts are feasts that foreshadow what is to come. So these have not reached their fulfillment yet. Rosh Hashanah was on October the 3rd of this year. And it's one of those, it's not a standing day. It's celebrated on the first of the month, of the 7th month, and we'll go into this a little bit later. But a Jewish calendar is not set up as our modern day calendars, which is like a Gregorian calendar. The Jewish calendar is based on the moon rather than the sun. And therefore, their days fluctuate as for the months. So you have to anticipate the moon phases in order to have the new month. And also something significant is that their days and their holidays begin in the evening versus the morning time. So I think when I first started learning about biblical feasts, I felt like they were so irrelevant to me. And I guess that's the natural inclination when we don't know about something that we think, oh, that's not pertinent to me. You know, we don't need to have a feast. And while we don't need to have a feast necessarily, I think it's still important that, once I realized the importance of these for you all too as well, because they just hold special meaning. And once you realize the connectivity and the connection and, what God is wanting us to do, it really affects your life, and you feel validated in that God is still moving and God still has a plan for us, because it was founded, from ancient of times. So looking back in the Old Testament, here in Leviticus chapter 23, this is where God appoints his times and appoints these feasts. He says, "Tell the people of Israel, the designated times of Adonai, which you are to proclaim as holy convocations, are my designated times." So I think that's important too, because when we think about biblical feasts, we think about this is something, that the Jewish community celebrates. This is something for Jews. But, in Leviticus here, he says that these are my designated times. It's not your times that I want you to celebrate for me. This is a recognition that God is wanting, and he's wanting his people, therefore, to recognize that, my designated times. Work is to be done on 6 days, but on the 7th day is a Sabbath of complete rest, a holy convocation. You are not to do any kind of work. It is a Sabbath for Adonai, even in your homes. These are the designated times of Adonai, the holy convocations you are to proclaim at their designated times. And then they go through and list out the spring feast and the fall feast, what we've alluded to earlier. And I think I have it's a Jewish-based Bible, and that's why you see the words here, Adonai, whereas in your Bible it would say Lord. And also it keeps some of the traditional Hebrew words like Shabbat here, which is a Sabbath. And I thought that's a word I don't feel like we use a whole lot. We go to church on Sundays, but I'll be honest, in our house, Sundays is not a day of rest. It's a day of preparation, actually, where I think about, I've got to put in my Walmart order for the upcoming week. I've got to get things together. So, I'll be honest, the Sabbath day is a day that we go to church, but a day also that I'm pretty busy preparing for things to go for the week. But the Bible is calling for us to set aside a day of rest. I've heard a rabbi say about the Sabbath that, you're to be a human being on that day, not a human doing. And I feel like so oftentimes I'm a doer. I'm always planning, getting together, thinking of things, and I fail to have a day of just being. And I try and think about that on Sundays more so, to have more a day of reflection and peace rather than planning and preparation. So in the biblical feasts here, God calls to have a Shabbat, and this is another word for Sabbath, and it's a day of religious observance and abstinence from work. So that's what I was just saying, God is asking us, to have a day of rest, to have a day where we are in a state of being rather than a state of doing. And that's something that occurs every week and throughout the Bible. It's one of those days that's stressed, and we think in the New Testament, when Jesus was performing miracles, and the people were very opposed to this. They were like, you're working on a day that you're called to rest. And my grandmother, we have a joke about when we do things on Sunday, and she'll say, was your ox in a ditch? And I'll be like, yeah, my ox is in a ditch. I had to get it out. So a Feast of Trumpets is what we're talking about. This is further in Leviticus. This is the particular verses that describe what this feast is. The Lord told Moses, tell the people of Israel, in the 7th month, the first day of the month is to be for you a day of complete rest for remembering, a holy convocation announced with blasts on the shofar. Do not do any kind of ordinary work, and bring an offering made by fire to the Lord. So the 7th month, the first day of the month, he is wanting this set aside. And this is what he asked to do, to have blasts of the shofar and for there not to be any kind of work done. This is also further discussed out in the book of Numbers, in Numbers chapter 29. Now in the 7th month, on the first day of the month, you shall have a holy assembly. You shall do no laborious work. It will be to you a day for blowing trumpets, and you shall offer a burnt offering as a soothing aroma to the Lord. 1 bull, 1 ram, and 7 male lambs, 1 year old without defect, and 1 male goat as a sin offering, to make atonement for you. Besides the burnt offering of the new moon and its grain offering, and then there's other offerings that are listed there, an offering by fire to the Lord. So I think when we read that, we think we don't have to make sacrifices. We don't do this anymore, therefore this is irrelevant. But I want to continue to tease this out for you and talk to you about it so you can find its relevance for you now. This is a chart of the feasts that I've talked about, that there are spring feasts that were fulfilled through Jesus's death, his resurrection, and also the fall feasts. So I would, love, and like I said, I'm a planner. I'd love in the spring for us to go through each one of those feasts before Easter. I think that would be so good. But right now we're in the bottom part of this chart in the fall feast. And you can see here where it says the number 7. That is in the Jewish month of Tishri. And the Feast of Trumpets is the start of the month, the first day of the month, as we've read, and it introduces the rest of the fall feasts that are to come, the Feast of Atonement and the Feast of Tabernacles. So, Rosh Hashanah, it began on the evening of October 3rd, and it lasted 2 nights. And I thought this was an interesting fact. Is like, it's difficult for me to think about a day or a celebration beginning in the evening, because we're so used to in the morning time. The morning is a new day. The morning starts the day. And Christmas morning, we'll think about that, or Easter morning. So we very much celebrate things in the morning of when we wake up. But in Jewish culture, these holidays start in the evening, and that is because God created first the night, then the day. And I don't think that's something that I think about. I think, let there be light. God created the day. But then, let's look here. Then God said, let there be light, and there was light. God saw that the light was good, and God divided the light from the darkness. God called the light day, and the darkness he called night. But then this next sentence here. So there was evening, and there was morning for one day. This is in Genesis chapter 1. So it is the custom of Jewish holidays then to celebrate the holidays in the evening versus the morning time. Another interesting thing here is we would ask, why does it last 2 nights? Because in the previous verses that I've read, there's nothing to say that this needs to extend for 2 days. So the reason why this is, it goes back to Jewish, I don't want to say custom necessarily, but their calendar system is not the same as our calendar system. They follow the moon phases for the start of each new month. And moon phases, I'm not an expert on this by any means, but I looked some stuff up about it. Moon cycles complete 8 phases every 29.5 days. So you can see that this kind of alters, that's an average. So you're constantly having to watch the moon and watching the phases to know when the next month would begin. And the next month begins when there is a new moon. So a new moon is when there's no moon in the sky, when it's completely covered in shadow from the earth. So the new moon starts the new month, and Tishri, which is the 7th month of when we're celebrating this holiday, it's celebrated on the first day. A new moon could not be confirmed in time. So what would happen is they would be looking up in the sky. They would have to see when the moon reached through its phases, and there was a system to where someone would report to the counselor, to the people in charge there, that there was a new moon, and they could confirm that. So this was like a process that happened. But they were concerned that that couldn't happen quick enough in order for them to know when the first day of the month was. So it was tradition that they would cover 2 days. It would be better for them to celebrate for 2 days and not miss it than to just celebrate on one day and then miss the timing of the day up. So traditionally, this was spread over the course of 2 days because of the calendars and because of the new moon. And here I looked up a lunar calendar, and we can see this is for October. So the new moon came here on Thursday, there on the 3rd. Yeah, that's right. So as I was saying earlier, Christmas is traditionally a Christian holiday, but we all know that, and this is different. Christmas is not something that the Bible calls us. It's not a God's appointed time that he's called people to celebrate. But we can think of, Easter and just the changes that Easter has with it culturally that we celebrate. We have like an Easter bunny, and there's baskets there, and we can trace that back to say that has, maybe not the bunny, but the baskets. I've heard about the eggs, say that those can represent stones and the stone rolling away. It seems a stretch to me, but also with this particular feast, modern day Jews celebrate Rosh Hashanah as a new year. And they have, you can see here this feast laid out, and each one of these, a pomegranate, has a symbolism of like a fruitfulness and prosperity. And then there is a fish head, which I think meant something similar to that. And I looked at this and I tried to not be judgmental, because I think about New Year's, because we try and eat like a traditional New Year's feast. How many of y'all do that? Yeah, you have, I always tried to, when I was younger, I thought I was going to eat a lot of cabbage, because that meant you got a lot of money. So you'd eat lots of greens, and then there was black-eyed peas. See, I think that was health. And there was hog jaw. And no, I think hog jaw was health, oddly enough. Yeah, because that didn't make sense to me, why eating that would make you healthy. So those foods had symbolism, and in the same way, these types of food has symbolism as well. And so another question is, why would Rosh Hashanah be celebrated as a new year? Because this is in the 7th month. This is a fall feast. This is not the start of the new year for their calendar, nor for our calendar, but this is celebrated in the modern day Jewish community as the start of a new year, because it is believed that this is the day that God created the earth, that it was the birth of the earth. So it's kind of like a spiritual new year and looking forward to the year upcoming is how it's celebrated today. Also here, it says it's not in the new year with either calendar. However, the sages considered the first Shabbat of the fall holidays of such great importance that it became celebrated as the spiritual new year. That's what we said there. Celebrated as the day God created Adam. I think I've read in some other things that it's the day God created the universe. Rosh Hashanah means the head of the year. So I think that's an important distinction too when we see that word. And as I said, it wouldn't be in our concordance, but it's as Yom Teruah. So Rosh Hashanah translated means the head of the year. Dwayne, did you have something? Oh, I thought that was July, wasn't it? I'm not, you'll have to call me on financial things, John. Okay, so this is in the 7th year. This is actually falls in the 7th year. I don't think that there's a tie to that. Is it July 1st or June 1st for? Oh, okay. That's, that's okay. So Rosh Hashanah is translated as the head of the year, and then Yom Teruah, it means the Feast of the Trumpets, and that's what I want to get into a little bit later in these slides here. That's what's really going to hold the importance for us. So in Jewish synagogues, the shofar is blown 100 times on this day, and they eat festive meals and celebrate. And just to give you some perspective on where I want to go with this, Yom Teruah, Rosh Hashanah is, and also the other name for it is Feast of Trumpets, three names meaning all the same things. This is the start of the fall feast. And from here, we count 10 days later, and this is designated as the most sacred of holidays, or most sacred of the fall feast. And as you'll see too, when we get to this, the Day of Atonement is going to be especially important for us as well, is Yom Kippur. And it's also known as the Day of Atonement, and this was the day that an animal was sacrificed to pay for the sins for the entire Jewish nation. And it was the time when the high priest was able to go into the holiest of holies, so one day a year, to make this animal sacrifice to cover for the sins of the people. So this was a very important day. So the Feast of Trumpets is the start of the fall feast, and we count 10 days later to this most important feast that we have on the Day of Atonement. The shofar is blown on Rosh Hashanah, and it's not blown again until the evening of Yom Kippur. So I wanted to not digress, but maybe digress, and wanted to talk about the shofar. That's something that they have started playing to be an announcement in between our services to say that, we're getting ready to time for worship. So they'll play that overhead, and it's a signal to everybody. It kind of catches everybody off guard. Number one, it's a sound that we don't often hear, but it is a trumpet type sound. But this comes from an instrument called the shofar. So I thought it would be good because Yom Teruah, what we're talking about, the Feast of Trumpets, is about blowing a shofar. So I thought it would be good for us to look into what is a shofar, why are these things blown, what does it mean? So a shofar is first mentioned in Exodus 19, and during our talk that we had on Mountains of the Bible when we talked about Mount Sinai, I hope you all remember those images of the mountain being consumed with smoke and fire and lightning, and God announced himself with the blowing of a trumpet here. So I want to read this out so we can appreciate this a little bit more. Then it came to pass on the third day in the morning that there were thunderings and lightnings and a thick cloud on the mountain, and the sound of the trumpet was very loud, so that all the people who were in the camp trembled. And Moses brought the people out of the camp to meet with God, and they stood at the foot of the mountain. Now Mount Sinai was completely in smoke because the Lord descended upon it in fire. Its smoke ascended like the smoke of a furnace, and the whole mountain quaked greatly. And when the blast of the trumpet sounded long and became louder and louder, Moses spoke, and God answered him by voice. Then the Lord came down upon Mount Sinai on the top of the mountain, and the Lord called Moses to the top of the mountain, and Moses went up. So this is when a trumpet is kind of first announced here in the Bible, and you can see it's announcing something amazing that completely transformed the Jewish population here. A shofar is made from a ram's horn. And it's made from a ram's horn for a particular reason. It alludes to the binding of Isaac. When Abraham was prepared to sacrifice Isaac, remember, God didn't have him follow through with his sacrifice. He provided for him. Remember the ram in the thicket that we had spoke about earlier. This ram and his horns were entangled in it, and it provided a substitutionary blood sacrifice. So the shofar is made from the horn of this sacrificed animal that God had provided to Abraham. And it's thought that because of the curved nature of this, it alludes to our contrite state as we humbly approach God. And this is different when I think about a modern day brass trumpet. It's shiny and big, and it makes a statement, and it's like has audacity to it. It's showy. But the ram's horn is a natural shape that could be in many different types of shapes, and it's something upbeat and lowly that we should have as we approach God. Something interesting is, I think lots of animals have horns or have antlers. Why couldn't it be of another animal? But it's specifically a ram's horn, and also it cannot be solid, which I think that I had read about a giraffe maybe being able to have an antler, but those are solid and couldn't be used for a shofar, because I think that was more of a tradition that had to be hollow, and then it couldn't be a cow. I have a picture of a cow there. And I think that it's important too. Why couldn't it be a cow? And that goes back to the golden calf. which is something that happened after the trumpet sounded and after God had engulfed the whole mountain in smoke and in fire, and Moses was led up to the mountain, and there was delivered the Ten Commandments, where God spoke to Moses and how he wanted, the dealings with the people, the feast laid out. And while Moses is receiving this revelation, while the people have already seen that only Moses could go up and is receiving this revelation, what did they do on the ground? They did not do as... Sometimes I think when we place ourselves in the Bible, sometimes we think like, I would just be so fearful and I would be praying and fasting that whole time. But to be honest, we would probably be like these people did. They got bored and they looked for other things to worship during this time. They created the golden calf during this time. So let's read about that. When the people saw that Moses was taking a long time to come down from the mountain, they gathered around Aaron and said to him, "Get busy and make us gods to go ahead of us, because this Moses, the man that brought us up from the land of Egypt, we don't know what has become of him." Aaron said to them, and this is another part where I think, what are you all talking about? He's led us out. Why can't you trust in him that he's, doing things for our good, that God is commanding him? But what did Aaron say? He said, "Have your wives, sons, and daughters strip off their gold earrings and bring them to me. I'm going to melt them down." The people stripped off their gold earrings and brought them to Aaron. He received what they gave him, melted it down, and made it into the shape of a calf. They said, "Israel, here is your God who brought you up from the land of Egypt." Now when Aaron saw this, he built an altar in front of it. And Aaron made a proclamation and said, "Tomorrow shall be a feast to the Lord." And he's made an altar to the calf and is now calling this calf Lord. And I think this is such a profound story, because to us it's like, oh my gosh, they saw all of these miracles. The mountain was on fire before them. They couldn't even withstand hearing the Lord speak. Like, they had been seeing these concrete things that had happened, and just out of a state of boredom and lack of continuing engagement, they quickly had to create something else to worship. And I think that we feel so disconnected with that. I feel like we think we don't make idols. We don't have a symbol in our house that we would bow down and worship to. But we fail to recognize the idols that we do have in our life. The idols that we have created may not be a concrete thing, and sometimes it is. Something that touched me this week that I had read was about your problems and about worrying. And it was saying worrying and having worry is like worshiping your problems. And I want y'all to think about that. Having worry about something, dwelling it over in your mind. How is this going to work out? How is it going to happen? You're worshiping the problem. And I've had to speak that to myself several times, because we all have worry. And the Bible speaks a lot about worry. And, I think we try and tell other people, don't worry about it. It's going to be okay. But how many of us have been comforted by hearing that? It doesn't work. You continually think, what if this happens? What if this happens? I need to be prepared, or I need to think of this, because we are fixers and we are doers and we want things to go our way. And when they don't, and we try and wrap our minds and we get caught up in these things, and we become worshiping the problem, because I think about, what if I had that time dedicated in prayer, Instead of worrying about this, the time that I'm dedicating to this worry, what if I was dedicating that time to prayer? So while we're not idolizing and while we're not seeing things set out before us that we are worshiping and bending down to, we are dedicating and sacrificing our times to things that we can't see that may not happen. And we are worshiping these other things that we worry about. So I just want you all to think about that in our worry. And I'm not saying that we shouldn't be worried. There are many things to worry about. There's many things to stress about. But when we dedicate our time and energy to rolling this around in our mind, and in medicine we call this rumination, when you think over and you think over and you think over something, call yourself out at that time and say, I am worshiping the problem. I'm worshiping the problem. And that, for me, in my mind, it hasn't erased my worry, but it has stopped me from dwelling on something that I cannot change. So we have golden calves in our lives. We don't recognize them as that, but we have golden calves in our lives. And the way that we can see this is we will always attribute to a higher power. We're always looking for an answer. You know, God has set eternity in our hearts that we are, if we're not looking to God, then we have that hole that we're always searching and we're always looking. That's what the people did. You know, when God wasn't immediately dealing with them in that situation, they had to have something else there that they could worship and that they can see. And what I've said before about us worshiping our problems, what we make sacrifices for, we idolize. Anything in our life that we are sacrificing for, we are idolizing. And I want us to think about that, because that's a heavy statement. You know, what do we make sacrifices for in our lives? We certainly make sacrifices for our children, sometimes for relationships that we're in, sometimes for our jobs. So in those situations, I mean, we are idolizing. And this is not a call to, as we say, throw the baby out with the bathwater. I think that's right. Throw the baby out with the bathwater. You know, we make sacrifices for our children, so should we not? It's recognizing the things that we are holding in high regard, that we are making sacrifices for, that we are in fact idolizing, and we need to keep in perspective the hierarchy that God has set up for us. In that first, we are to recognize Him. We are to make sacrifices to Him and be obedient to Him. And then the hierarchy down below that is everything else that falls. So when we are flipping things up, and when we have worry, and when we have tension, and we're rolling these things over in our mind, we are worshiping the problem. We are idolizing the problem, and even though it's not as beautiful and glowing as a golden calf, sometimes it's something ugly that we're stressing about, and something ugly that's in our lives. Even worse than the people that we judge for creating a golden calf, we have set up a much uglier idol that we worship far more dedicated than our worship that we have to God. It is, and you know, in medicine, it's something, you know, that I think about. We do have worry, and when we study medicine and when we study psychiatry and we learn about anxiety disorder and obsessive compulsive disorder and depressive disorder, I think honestly when we read through those characteristics, I feel like we could all find ourselves in any one of those categories. You know, somebody here has to have their things placed just so. If things are out of order, they just get upset about them. Or, you know, we've all had bouts of depression this week, and worry and anxiety. You know, when is the power going to come back on? When is our internet going to come back on? You know, for us, our internet and water's out. And so, you know, we each have these these different experiences with depression and with anxiety. But what I wanted to say was, in medicine, what we learn is when it gets to a point where it interferes with your ability to live a normal life, when it starts to then overturn and consume you. So, these sins that we have of, the Bible calls us not to worry, but it's when it overtakes us to a point where we are now worshiping the problem rather than worshiping God and trusting that even, and this is something else that's so hard, even if it all falls apart, even if things don't work out in a way that I think would be best for me. And Janet sings that song that God is still on the throne. So with our anxieties, with our worries, with the family members, with the relationships, with the financial strain, whatever we have going on in our lives that's consuming us, that we are worshiping, because that's what we are dedicating our time and energy to and thinking about, that even if things don't work out the way in our minds, the way that we think it should, that God is still in control, that God is still on the throne, and that He is still worthy of worship, even above our problems, because His perspective is so much higher than ours. Amen. So, like I said, I think, as I've been saying before, I think we have a plan for things and how we want things to work out. And I was, wanting to get this talk in before Rosh Hashanah so y'all could appreciate this holiday that's already been here and left. But I really feel like, that through the timing of things that, God has wanted us to spend more time in it, to go through this slowly. And so I'm going to stop right there. But I want us to, just this week, I want us to have that image of the golden calf in our brains. But instead of this golden calf, I want us to imagine what our golden calves are. What the worry that we have going on in our minds, the things that is consuming us, the things that have gotten to the point where it's interfering with our daily life. And I want us to think of that. And Aaron set that up and he said, tomorrow we will make sacrifices to this. And tomorrow you all may make sacrifices to it. In the time that you consume in your brain, in your mind, worrying and working around this problem, you're going to lay down your sacrifices to your golden calf every day this week. And I want you to think, am I worshiping God or am I worshiping the problem? And our faith has to be so much stronger in God than it is in our problems. Amen. Thank you all.